Snow fell in gentle swirls across the small American town of Everdale, catching the morning light like scattered diamonds. The air carried the sharp bite of winter, cold enough to make breath visible in small clouds that hung and disappeared. Behind Jerry's diner on the edge of town, a group of Hell's Angels worked on their motorcycles, chrome gleaming despite the gray sky above. The sound of metal against metal mixed with low laughter and the smell of coffee and motor oil that floated through the lot. It was their usual spot before a long ride. The camaraderie, the teasing, the familiar rhythm of preparation. Nothing about that frigid December morning seemed unusual until a small voice broke through their routine. "Can you be my friends for just one day?" 8 small words trembling in the cold morning air. They turned as one. By the chain-link fence stood a girl, maybe 10 years old, skinny and pale against the winter backdrop. Her left arm was wrapped in a cast covered with faded doodles and signatures. Her right hand clutched a wrinkled piece of paper. Her sneakers disappeared into snowdrifts. Her backpack hung torn from one shoulder, and her eyes held the weariness of someone far beyond her years. For a long moment, no one spoke. Marcus Turner, known to everyone as Red for his once fiery beard, now streaked with gray, watched her carefully. The girl looked scared but not lost, more like someone who had already decided she had nowhere else to go. "What did you say, kid?" Red asked, his voice rough from years of road dust and cigarettes. The girl swallowed hard, her small throat working beneath a scarf too thin for the weather. "Tomorrow is Friendship Day at school," she said. "We have to bring a friend." Her voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "I don't have any." The laughter around the lot faded. Coffee cups froze midair. Someone muttered, "Did she just say she doesn't have a friend?" Red took a slow breath. He'd seen plenty in his life. Bar fights, funerals, betrayals, the kind of heartbreak that changes a man's soul. But never a little girl asking a gang of bikers to be her friend. The child stepped closer, leaving footprints in the fresh snow. She held out the paper with a mittened hand. "I drew this," she said quietly. Red took it, careful not to tear the damp sheet. It was a crayon drawing. Motorcycles in every color lined up under the words, "My Friends." The Skull and Wings logo was there too, messy but unmistakable. "You drew this?" Red asked. The girl nodded, snowflakes catching in her dark hair. "They said Hell's Angels are bad people." She looked up at him with clear brown eyes. "But you look nice." The group went silent again. For men used to judgment and fearful stares, hearing those words from a trembling chin felt like being hit in the chest. Red knelt down, his eyes level with hers, ignoring the cold seeping through his jeans. "What happened to your arm, kid?" "I fell off a bike trying to show the girls I could ride like them." She looked down at her boots. "They laughed, called me metal girl, said nobody wants a broken friend." One biker cursed under his breath. Another shook his head. Red studied her, cast, cracked and worn, covered in childish signatures that couldn't hide the loneliness beneath. "What's your name?" "Emma." "Well, Emma," Red said, "you got guts walking up to us like that." Emma shrugged, her cast shifting against her winter coat. "My grandma says I don't think before I do things." That earned a few chuckles. It broke the heaviness for just a second. But Red saw something deeper in those eyes. Not just sadness, but hope, fighting to stay alive. He looked at his men. Some 30 years on the road together had taught them to communicate without words. "So the kid needs a friend for a day," he said simply. Tank, the biggest of them, grumbled. "You serious, Red? We can't just roll up to a school. They'll call the cops." Another biker laughed nervously. "Imagine 70 bikers showing up for Friendship Day." But Bear, the oldest with lines etched deep into his weathered face, leaned forward. "Doesn't sound like anyone else is showing up for her." That sentence hung in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away. Red looked back at Emma. "Where's your mom, kid?" "She works all the time. 2 jobs." "Your dad?" Emma's face changed. Something shuddered behind her eyes. "He left." No one said a word after that. They all understood abandonment. Red reached into his leather jacket pocket and pulled out a small spare patch, a miniature of their famous emblem. He placed it in Emma's good hand, closing her small fingers around it. "Consider this alone," Red said. "You're one of us for today." Emma's eyes widened. "For real?" "Yeah, for real." A flicker of a smile appeared on her face, small, shaky, but enough to melt the whole snow-covered yard. "So," she asked hopefully, "you'll come?" Red hesitated. He knew the headlines that could follow, the looks, the rumors, but then he remembered his own childhood, being the kid who never fit anywhere. He nodded slowly. "We'll see, kid." That was all Emma needed. Her eyes brightened, her shoulders straightened, and for the first time that morning, she looked proud. "Thank you," she said softly. "Even if you don't come, thanks for listening." She turned to leave, walking down the snowy street with her backpack hanging from one shoulder. When she reached the corner, she stopped, looked back, and waved. Red raised a hand in return. No one spoke until the girl disappeared around the block. Then Stitch, lean and tattooed, muttered, "Damn kid's braver than most grown men." Tank snorted, "Yeah, but we can't just show up, Red. You know how people see us." Red didn't answer. He kept staring down the empty road, the drawing still in his hand. He saw himself in that girl, the hunger for belonging, the quiet ache of being unwanted. Finally, he whispered almost to himself, "Friendship Day. What a joke." The others went back to their bikes, pretending to be busy, but their faces had changed. Something had cracked open in that lot, something nobody expected. A little girl with a broken arm had walked into their world and left a mark they couldn't shake. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for pity. She just wanted to belong, even if only for one day. And behind that diner, under the smell of gasoline and coffee, a group of men who thought the world had already judged them began to wonder what it would mean to show up for her. Because maybe deep down they remembered what it felt like to be that kid, standing alone in the cold, hoping someone, anyone, would say yes. The lot stayed quiet long after Emma disappeared down the street. The engines were cold now, and the only sound was the wind brushing against the row of bikes, carrying occasional bursts of snow that settled on chrome and leather. For once, the men who usually filled the morning with laughter and noise had nothing to say. Red leaned against his Harley, arms crossed, eyes lost somewhere far away. The crumpled drawing still rested in his hand. The paper was soft now, smudged from his thumb. He kept looking at it, tracing the crooked lines of motorcycles drawn by a girl who just wanted to belong. Tank broke the silence first. "You're not really thinking about it, are you?" Red didn't answer. "Come on, man," Tank said, shaking his head. "We ride into that school, it's over. Cops, parents, cameras. We'll look like trouble crashing a birthday party." Bear lit a cigarette and blew smoke toward the winter sky, where it mingled with the falling snow. "We already look like trouble," he said quietly. But that kid didn't see it that way. Stitch, the youngest of the group at 42, leaned on his handlebars. "Kid's gutsy. Reminded me of myself before I learned better." Red finally spoke. "Before you learned what?" Stitch shrugged. "That people don't care, Red. You grow up. You stop asking anyone to show up. That's how it goes." Nobody replied. The words hung in the air, raw and familiar. Red's voice softened. "That's the problem, Stitch. The kid still believes someone might." He looked back down at the drawing. 70 bikes, a sun in the corner, stick figure men with wings on their backs, childish, messy, pure. Bear exhaled smoke through his nose. "Maybe it ain't about the school. Maybe it's about the kid knowing somebody listened." Red nodded slowly. "Maybe." He paused. "But listening ain't the same as showing up." That sentence hit them all. They'd all known people who talked big and disappeared when it mattered. They'd all been left behind at some point, by friends, by family, by the world. Red stuffed the drawing into his jacket pocket and grabbed his helmet. "Let's take a ride." "Where?" Tank asked. "Nowhere in particular." They rode. Engines roared to life, filling the small town with thunder. Windows rattled, birds scattered from snow-laden power lines. But the noise wasn't for show. It was to think, the only way these men knew how. They rode through the quiet streets past Everdale Elementary, the school Emma had mentioned. The building was small, with faded brick and a playground buried under fresh snow. Red slowed down as they passed, looking at the empty yard. He imagined what tomorrow would look like. The kids pairing up, laughing, shouting, and Emma standing alone, pretending not to care. Red's chest tightened. They rode on, heading toward the edge of town where the road stretched wide and the air smelled like open country. The ride was silent. No music, no talk. Just the hum of engines and the rhythm of thoughts, none of them said out loud. When they stopped at a gas station miles away, Red didn't get off his bike right away. He just sat there staring at nothing until Bear walked up beside him. "You're thinking about her?" Red gave a small laugh. "You'd think I was the one with a broken arm." Bear smirked. "Maybe you are, just not the kind that needs a cast." The line made Red grin for a second, then fade. "You ever notice," he said quietly, "how we scare people until they need us?" Bear nodded. "Yeah, then we're the heroes for 5 minutes and back to villains again." "That kid didn't see that." "Nope." Bear tossed his cigarette into a snowbank. "That's what makes it hurt." They stood there for a moment, the sound of the wind mixing with the faint rumble of traffic. Back at the diner that evening, the rest of the crew had gathered again. Same seats, same mugs of coffee, but the energy had changed. Nobody talked about rides or plans. The conversation kept circling back to the girl. Tank was pacing near the counter. "We shouldn't even be thinking about this. You know how people are. They see one of us and it's all headlines. Bikers invade school." "Invade?" Stitch scoffed. "It's not a damn invasion. It's Friendship Day. We'd be the friendliest guys there." Laughter rippled through the room, quick but nervous. Joe, who rarely spoke more than 10 words a day, finally said, "You ever think maybe this is exactly what people need to see? Not as what they think we are, but what we really can be." Tank rolled his eyes. "And what's that, babysitters?" Joe didn't flinch. "Human." The word landed like a punch. Red took a sip of coffee, his reflection rippling on the surface of the cup. "She asked for one day," he said finally. "Not a speech, not money, just one day." Bear leaned back in his chair. "So what's stopping us?" Red sighed. "Everything." The group fell silent again. Outside, the snow had stopped, and the sky was turning gold. The kind of sunset that makes you think too much. Red reached into his jacket and pulled out Emma's drawing again. He smoothed it out on the table. "Look at this," he said. "The kid thinks we're heroes." Tank snorted. "That's her first mistake." But no one laughed. Red kept his eyes on the paper. "You know what's funny? We spend half our lives proving we're not villains, but we never try to be heroes either." Bear grinned faintly. "You trying to give a speech, Red?" "Maybe." He looked around. "We can't fix the world. Hell, we can't even fix ourselves half the time. But maybe we can fix one morning for one kid." The room stayed quiet for a beat. Then Stitch said softly, "That's not nothing." Joe nodded. "It's something." Tank groaned, rubbing his face. "You guys are losing it. You really gonna ride up there in full gear? What, hand out lollipops to kids?" Red smirked. "Nah, maybe just some respect." That night, the clubhouse lights stayed on longer than usual. Conversations came and went in low tones. The smell of leather and gasoline filled the air, mixed with the tension of a decision none of them wanted to make too quickly. Red sat at the bar, the drawing in front of him, a cup of coffee growing cold beside it. He stared at the crooked handwriting. "Friends ride together." It wasn't perfect, but it said everything. He thought about Emma's cracked sneakers, her trembling voice, the way she'd looked back before turning the corner. That kind of hope didn't last long in the world, and Red couldn't stand the thought of being one more adult who let it die. Tank walked over, shaking his head. "You really think this is worth the trouble?" Red didn't answer right away. He looked up, eyes tired but steady. "You ever been asked for something that small and realized it meant everything?" Tank didn't reply. He just stared back, then turned away with a grunt. The room fell quiet again. Only the soft hum of a radio filled the air. Finally, Red stood. "I'm writing tomorrow. Anyone who doesn't want to come, don't." No speech, no plan, just that. Bear smiled under his beard. "Then I guess we're all writing." One by one, heads nodded. The decision had been made, not by orders, not by pride, but by something deeper. No one talked about how the town would react or what it might cost them. None of it mattered now because somewhere in that quiet American town, a 10-year-old girl was sitting in her room, maybe staring at a patch, maybe wondering if anyone would really show up. And for the first time in a long time, a group of men who thought they were done changing felt something stir, something small, something human. It wasn't about image or reputation. It wasn't even about redemption. It was about a promise that had never been spoken, but already made. A girl had asked, and somewhere deep inside, they all knew the answer had already been yes. The diner lights were dim when Red stepped outside that night. The air was bitter cold, the kind of silence that makes a man think too much. He kept seeing that small face, Emma's wide eyes, her broken arm, and that shaky smile that shouldn't have belonged to a 10-year-old. He didn't sleep. Instead, he rode. Bear and Stitch joined him, no questions asked. The three of them rolled through town, engines low, lights cutting across the dark streets until they reached the poorer side. Red didn't need directions. He just knew. They stopped in front of a worn-down apartment building. The windows flickered with old TV light, and on the porch railing hung a tiny bicycle missing a pedal, now half buried in snow. Red killed the engine and walked up the stairs. A woman answered the door halfway, tired eyes, scrubs still on from a late shift. "Evening, ma'am," Red said softly. "Name's Marcus, but folks call me Red. We met your girl today." Her eyes softened. "You're the bikers." "Yes, ma'am." She hesitated, then opened the door wider. "I'm Jessica. Come in before the neighbors start talking." The apartment was small but spotless. 2 rooms, a hand-me-down couch, the smell of soap and coffee. On the table lay a worksheet titled Friendship Day Interview, Ask Your Friend. 3 questions. The lines were empty. Emma appeared from the hallway, pajamas, cast, hair still damp from a bath. When she saw them, her mouth fell open. "You came," she said, disbelief in her voice. "Just checking in," Red said with a smile. Jessica folded her arms. "She doesn't usually get visitors. You'll have to forgive the surprise." Red nodded. "Mind if we ask what happened?" Emma glanced at her mom. She nodded. The girl looked down at her cast. "I fell off Mr. Wilson's dirt bike. I wanted to show the girls I could ride, but when I fell, they didn't help. They laughed." "Laughed?" Bear repeated, frowning. Emma nodded. "They call me Metal Girl. Tap my cast when I walk by. It's like I don't count." Red's throat tightened. He'd heard laughter like that before. The cruel kind, meant to remind you where you don't belong. "Mr. Alvarez, the janitor, found me," Emma continued. "He used to ride a bike too. He said I reminded him of himself. He came to see me in the hospital." Her voice dropped. "No one else did." Red noticed Jessica look down, shame flickering behind exhaustion. "She works 2 jobs," Emma added quickly. "I know she wanted to." Jessica smiled weakly. "She's always making excuses for me." Red chuckled softly. "Good daughter." Then serious again. "And tomorrow's Friendship Day." Emma nodded. "You're supposed to bring a friend. Take a picture. Write something nice." She looked down. "Grandma came last year, but she's sick. I didn't want to be the only one again." She looked up, eyes hopeful. "I thought maybe you could come. But you don't have to. I know you're busy." That last line cracked every man in the room. Red cleared his throat. "Emma, what you asked for? That's not small. It takes guts to ask for help." Emma shrugged. "Grandma says brave just means scared, but doing it anyway." Bear smiled. "Smart grandma." Jessica finally spoke. "Look, I know how people see you men. Leather, tattoos, noise. They don't see what she saw." She paused. But when she came home with that patch, she stood taller. Red nodded. "Ma'am, if we come tomorrow, we'll come with respect. Quiet, careful, just to make sure she's not alone." She hesitated, then smiled. "You'd really do that?" "We'll make sure the school and police know," Red said. "No surprises." "Thank you," she whispered. "She needs something good." Emma grinned wide. "So you'll come?" Red met her eyes. "Yeah, kid, we'll come." The girl's smile could have lit the whole town through the winter night. Outside, Bear muttered, "You sure about this?" Red zipped his jacket against the cold. "No, but we're doing it anyway." Back at the clubhouse, a few more men were waiting. The story spread quick. The fall, the bullies, the janitor, the empty paper on the table. Joe spoke first. "We go in peace. Helmets off, no engines roaring. We're there for the kid, not the crowd. Tank grumbled. People will freak out when they see us. Then let them, Bear said. Maybe they'll finally see who we really are. That shut everyone up. Red looked at the drawing pinned on the wall. Emma's shaky crayon bikes, the words, "Friends ride together," scrolled at the top. He tapped it with one finger. This, this is what we're riding for. They started making quiet calls. Joe reached the police station, explaining it was for a school event. The officer on duty remembered the group from a charity ride. "Keep it calm and we'll stay back," he said. Jessica emailed the principal, Mrs. Winters, warning her in advance. "No trouble, just kindness," she wrote. By midnight it was set. No roaring, no headlines, just presence. Before turning in, Red stood in the empty clubhouse and stared at the drawing one more time. "Friends ride together," he murmured. For a man who had spent his life leading riders across miles of asphalt, this was the first time that line meant something real. He turned off the light, walked outside, and breathed in the cold night air. The bikes gleamed faintly under the moon, a line of chrome and shadow waiting for dawn. Somewhere across town, a girl was falling asleep with a patch under her pillow and a little hope finally stitched back together. And for the first time in years, Red felt like the road ahead might actually lead somewhere worth going. The morning came gray and cold, the kind of morning that made you want to stay under a warm blanket and forget the world existed. But at the Hells Angels clubhouse, the lights were already on, and the smell of coffee and gasoline filled the air. Red stood at the long wooden table in the center of the room. A map of the town spread out in front of him. Around him, the men were gathering one by one, boots thumping, mugs clinking, engines rumbling outside. Nobody was joking this time. The laughter that usually came with morning coffee had been replaced by something heavier. Purpose. Tank walked in first, rubbing his hands together. "You really going to do this, Red?" Red didn't look up. "We said we would." Bear came next, a toothpick hanging from his mouth. "We talked to the school. Principal's nervous, but said as long as we behave, she won't call the cops." Stitch added, "Police know too. They'll be watching from across the street just in case." Tank snorted. "Just in case we start a riot at an elementary school?" "Just in case someone panics," Red said. "Can't blame them. We're not exactly the poster boys for quiet mornings." He folded his arms and looked around the room. "This isn't about us. It's about a kid who asked for something simple. For someone to stand next to her." Bear nodded. "Then we stand." Red smiled faintly. "We stand." The plan wasn't complicated. It never is when the heart's in the right place. They'd meet at the diner at 7 a.m., ride slow, no engines roaring, no smoke, no noise, just presence. They'd park on the edge of the schoolyard, line up clean, helmets off, hands open. "I don't want one wrong look," Red warned. "Not one cigarette, not one word that makes a teacher nervous." Tank grumbled. "So basically you want us to act like choir boys." Red's eyes narrowed. "Just for a day?" That made the room chuckle, low and short, but it broke the tension. They started preparing. Jackets brushed clean, bikes polished until the chrome looked like mirrors. Some of the men brought small gifts, stickers, extra helmets, a new backpack Bear had picked up that morning. None of them said it out loud, but they all knew what this meant. For men used to being feared, they were about to do something that required more courage than any bar fight or backroad brawl. They were about to be seen differently. By 6:30, the clubhouse buzzed like a beehive. Joe adjusted the flag on his bike's backrest. Stitch filled a thermos for Red. Tank muttered to himself about public image makeovers, but even he looked sharper than usual. Bear walked up beside Red, looking out the window where dawn was breaking faintly behind mountains heavy with snow. "You sure about 72 bikes, Red?" Red rubbed his chin. "We won't all go in. Half can ride behind. Stop down the road. Enough to make an entrance, not a scene." Bear nodded. "Smart." Stitch checked his watch. "You think the girl's ready?" Red smiled. "I think she's been ready her whole life. She just needed someone to show up." Meanwhile, across town, Emma stood in front of her bedroom mirror, trying to button her plaid shirt correctly, fingers fumbling with the top button. Her cast made dressing difficult, and anxiety didn't help. She'd laid out her clothes the night before. Best jeans, though a bit too short at the ankles. A shirt her mom had ironed despite exhaustion. Sneakers cleaned as best she could. She kept glancing at the patch on her nightstand. Real. Not something she dreamed, but doubt crept in with the morning shadows. People didn't show up for her. That's just how it was. Why would today be different? Even if they'd been nice yesterday, even if they'd promised, people said a lot of things they didn't mean. Emma finished the last button, realized she'd done it wrong again, and sighed. Her fingers felt numb from cold and nerves. Outside her window, snow had begun to fall again, silent and steady. She picked up the patch, turning it over in her hands. The skull with wings looked back at her, fierce and free. They might come, she whispered to herself, her breath fogging the cold window glass. Or they might not. Either way, I'll be okay. But deep inside, beneath layers of hard-learned indifference, a small flame of hope refused to die. It whispered back, against all experience. Maybe this time will be different. They rolled out just before sunrise. The engines hummed, not roared. The air carried a chill that bit through gloves and woke you up better than coffee ever could. The line of motorcycles stretched for blocks, black, red, and chrome, weaving like a silent river through the waking town. People came out of porches and driveways, eyes wide, some waving, some staring. A few pulled out phones. The sight of so many Hell's Angels riding in formation wasn't something you saw every day, especially not this quietly, this purposefully. Red led the line, Bear on one side, Stitch on the other. Tank grumbled from the back, but never slowed down. By the time they reached the diner parking lot, the place looked like a movie scene. Sunlight breaking through thin clouds, steam rising off coffee cups, the smell of breakfast and exhaust mixing in the air. Red parked first, pulled off his helmet, and called the group together. "All right, listen up," he said. "This isn't about scaring anyone or making a show. You keep your cool. You smile if someone looks at you. And you remember who this is for. One girl, one morning. That's it." Stitch raised his thermos. "To the kid." The group echoed softly. "To the kid." They mounted up again, engines low and steady, and headed toward the school. The road curved gently through the center of town, past the grocery store, past the gas station, past the little barber shop where old men were already reading newspapers. As they rode, more people looked up. Some smiled, others whispered. But for once, nobody pointed with fear. At the front, Red's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. He wasn't thinking about reputation or judgment or what people might post online later. He was thinking about a small girl tying her shoes that morning, wondering if anyone would come. When they reached the school's main street, Red slowed the group down even more. The first students were already outside, backpacks slung over their shoulders, laughter spilling through the crisp morning air. Some noticed the bikes first. "What the?" one kid whispered, elbowing his friend. "Is that the Hell's Angels?" Within seconds, phones were out, eyes wide, mouths open. Teachers stepped out of the doors, squinting into the sun. A security guard walked forward, radio in hand, hesitating when he saw the police car already idling by the curb. The officer behind the wheel, a local named Reed, stepped out, smiled slightly, and gave a small nod to Red, the kind that said, "We talked. You're clear." Red nodded back. He motioned with one hand, and the bikes began to line up across the curb in perfect formation. Engines idled, then shut off one by one until all that remained was silence and the clicking of cooling metal. And then down the walkway, a small figure appeared. Emma. She wore her best clothes, the plaid shirt buttoned wrong at the top, jeans that were just a little too short, and her cast freshly decorated with new drawings. In her good hand, she held the little Hell's Angels patch Red had given her. Her eyes widened when she saw them. The girl froze for a second, unable to move. Red stepped off his bike and waved her over. "Morning, kid." Emma started walking, then jogging, then running. She reached Red and stopped, breathless, looking up. "You really came," Red smiled. "Told you we would." The girl's eyes darted from one side to the other. Rows of bikes, leather jackets, grizzled faces softened by smiles. Tank bent down. "You the reason I had to shave this morning?" Emma giggled. "You didn't shave very well." Laughter broke through the line. Warm, real, human. Red knelt beside her. "Ready for school?" Emma nodded, gripping the patch tighter. Yeah, I think so. Good, Red said. Then let's walk you in. The teachers didn't know what to do. Some froze, some whispered. The principal stood on the steps, hands clasped, trying to process what she was seeing. A girl with a broken arm walking toward the doors, flanked by a wall of bikers. And yet, no one looked scared anymore because something in the air had changed. There was no chaos, no threat, just presence. The engine's quiet, the sunlight glinting off chrome, and in the middle of it all, a 10-year-old kid walking taller than she ever had before. The moment didn't need words. It was a kind of peace you could feel, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, it simply shows up. The men stood by as Emma reached the school doors. She turned back to Red and said softly, "You can come inside too, right?" Red looked toward the principal, who hesitated, then smiled faintly and nodded. "Yes, he can." Red placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "Then lead the way, partner." And as they walked into that school together, the world outside grew quiet enough for everyone watching to feel something they hadn't felt in a long time. Respect, not the kind you demand, the kind you earn by simply keeping your word. The town heard them before it saw them, not the deafening thunder people expected from a biker ride. This sound was deeper, slower, more respectful, a low hum that carried through the cold morning air, steady as a heartbeat. Shop doors opened. A mail carrier froze beside his truck. Parents waiting in driveways turned to look as 70 motorcycles rolled through the snow-dusted streets of Everdale. They weren't there to make noise. They were there to keep a promise. At the front of the line rode Red Turner, his eyes steady, his jaw calm. Bear and Stitch flanked him on either side, and the rest followed like a wave of steel and leather. They didn't rev engines or shout. They rode in silence, the sunlight bouncing off polished chrome like a slow-moving sunrise. When they turned onto the school's street, the chatter of kids and the sounds of morning fell away. One by one, the bikes eased to the curb. Engines clicked off, the air filled with the soft tick of cooling metal, and then quiet. Every head turned. Teachers peered through windows frosted with ice patterns. Parents clutched coffee cups in gloved hands. Kids stopped mid-laugh, their mouths open, unsure what they were seeing. The school grounds had transformed overnight. A fresh blanket of snow covered the playground equipment. Icicles hung from the edges of rooftops, and now a line of motorcycles created a gleaming border along the fence. Steam rose from exhaust pipes into the winter air, creating a scene both surreal and beautiful. Inside the school hallway, Emma walked with her back straight and head high. Red followed a few steps behind, his heavy boots leaving wet prints on the polished floor. Bear and Stitch came next, then a handful of others who'd been invited in. The rest waited outside, standing guard by their bikes. Students whispered from doorways. Teachers exchanged nervous glances, but no one stopped them. Something about the quiet dignity of the procession made interruption feel wrong. Emma's classroom was at the end of the hall, room 107. A colorful banner hung across the door. Friendship Day, everyone belongs. The irony wasn't lost on Red. As they approached, a woman stepped out. Mrs. Wilson, Emma's teacher, mid-50s, graying hair pulled back, eyes wary behind glasses. She looked at the bikers, then at Emma, then back at the bikers. "Good morning," she said cautiously. "Morning, ma'am," Red replied, his voice deliberately soft. "We're here for Friendship Day, with Emma." Mrs. Wilson's gaze softened as she looked at Emma. The girl stood taller than usual, her cast no longer hidden behind her back but held naturally at her side. "I see," the teacher said. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Well then, welcome to room 107. The classroom fell silent as they entered. 25 children sat at clustered desks, their activities forgotten. Some leaned back in their seats, others stared openly. In the corner, a table was set up with cookies and juice boxes, construction paper and markers, all the trappings of an elementary school celebration. Each desk had 2 name cards on it, student and friend, all except one desk at the back, which had only Emma written in careful cursive. Mrs. Wilson cleared her throat. "Class, this is Emma and her friends. They've joined us for Friendship Day." A boy in the front row whispered loudly, "Those are real Hell's Angels." Red smiled slightly. "Morning, everyone. A few murmured good mornings came back, tentative but curious. Emma took her seat, shoulders square, chin up. The girl who once hid behind her cast now looked like she'd found her own armor. On her desk was a worksheet titled, My Friend and Me. She picked up a pencil with her good hand and began to write carefully. What I admire, he keeps his word. What he taught me, I'd ask anyway. Mrs. Wilson watched in silence, her smile trembling slightly. In the back, Red leaned against the wall. He'd led men through fights, storms, and funerals, but never something like this. Somehow standing in a fourth-grade classroom beside a kid who just found her voice felt like the most important thing he'd ever done. Outside, a few bikers who stayed with the bikes began talking to curious kids and parents. Are those real skulls? One boy asked, pointing to a helmet decoration. Only if you don't do your homework, Tank said, straight-faced. Laughter broke the tension. A teacher whispered to another, They're actually polite. Yeah, her friend answered. Maybe we judge too fast. Red turned toward the hallway where the janitor, Mr. Alvarez, had stopped his cart mid-roll. Their eyes met, and the older man smiled. The gray-haired man with work-worn hands gave Emma a small salute. The girl saluted back. Two riders, decades apart, connected by understanding. The morning moved forward with an odd normality. Parents brought siblings, grandparents, and friends for the event. Photos were taken, cookies were eaten, children proudly introduced their guests. When Friendship Day's morning circle began, each kid shared who they brought. A brother, a grandfather, a soccer teammate. Then came Emma's turn. She stood, cast across her chest, and said simply, My friend is Red. He listens. He showed up. No one clapped. They didn't need to. The silence in that room was louder than applause. Red felt something tighten behind his ribs. Not pride, not ego, but a kind of peace he hadn't felt in years. The morning might have ended there, wrapped up neatly like a fairy tale. But reality rarely follows such simple lines, especially in small towns where change comes slowly and fear dies hard. At the administration office, Principal Winters faced her first crisis of the day. Sophia Parker, mother of Dylan and wife of Everdale's chief of police, stood before her desk, arms folded tightly across her chest. This is unacceptable, Rachel, Sophia said, her voice low but sharp. Hell's Angels? In our school? Do you know what message this sends? Principal Winters, a woman in her early 60s with a reputation for fairness, leaned forward. Mrs. Parker, they were invited guests for Friendship Day. They've been respectful. Respectful? Sophia scoffed. They're a gang. My husband has files on them. We have safety protocols for a reason. Officer Reed approved their visit, Principal Winters replied. Emma Walker has had a difficult year. This matters to her. Sophia's eyes narrowed. This matters to all our children. I've already called 5 other parents who share my concerns. The implied threat hung in the air. School board politics, budget meetings, the power certain families held. Principal Winters had been an educator for 30 years. She recognized a storm brewing. I understand your concerns, Mrs. Parker, but perhaps you should see for yourself before making judgments. In classroom 107, the mood had shifted from stunned silence to cautious curiosity. A group of girls had gathered around Emma's desk, suddenly interested in the friend who'd brought leather-clad bikers to school. Did they let you ride on their motorcycles? One asked. Emma shook her head. Not yet, but Red said they might help fix my bike. The one you crashed on? Another girl asked. Emma nodded, unconsciously touching her cast. That was a bad fall, the first girl said, looking down. Something like guilt flickered across her face. We heard you crying. Emma met her eyes. Yeah, it hurt. The simple honesty created a moment of connection neither girl had expected. Across the room, Red watched the interaction. He recognized the language of childhood apology, spoken without words. Small steps, but they mattered. The classroom door opened, and Principal Winters entered with Sophia Parker. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Red recognized the look immediately. He'd seen it in every town they had ever ridden through. The fear, the judgment, the certainty of knowing what kind of men they were without ever speaking to them. Mrs. Wilson, Principal Winters said quietly, May I have a word? The teacher excused herself, joining the 2 women in the hallway. Red didn't move, but he noticed Bear and Stitch shifting their stance slightly. Old instincts. Preparing for trouble. Minutes passed. The children continued their activities, but the ease had vanished. Even they could sense the tension. Emma looked toward Red, worry creeping back into her eyes. He gave her a reassuring nod. "We're not leaving," it said. "Not until it's time." Mrs. Wilson returned, her face composed but tight around the eyes. "Mr. Turner," she said, "Principal Winters would like to speak with you." Red nodded. He straightened from the wall and walked to the door with deliberate calm. In the hallway, Principal Winters and Sophia Parker waited, two opposing forces in the narrow space. "Mr. Turner," Principal Winters began, "I want to thank you for joining us today. Emma seems very happy." "She's a good kid," Red said simply. Sophia cut in. "Mr. Turner, I'm concerned about the presence of your group at our school. We have safety policies." Red met her gaze steadily. "We're here for a school event, ma'am, invited. We checked with the police. Officer Reed cleared us." "My husband is Chief Parker," Sophia replied, an edge in her voice, "and I don't believe he was consulted." Red didn't react to the implied threat. "We're not here to cause trouble, just to make sure one kid doesn't have to stand alone today." Principal Winters spoke before Sophia could respond. "No one is suggesting you've caused any disruption, Mr. Turner, but we do need to consider all parents' concerns." "All parents?" Red asked mildly. "Or just some?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable in its accuracy. Principal Winters had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Perhaps we could compromise," she suggested. "The classroom portion of Friendship Day concludes at lunch. Afterward, there's a small gathering in the gym for photos. Maybe a smaller delegation of your group could attend that part." Red considered. It wasn't unreasonable. "I'll talk to my men." Sophia opened her mouth to object, but Principal Winters continued smoothly. "Excellent. Thank you for understanding, Mr. Turner. And again, thank you for being here for Emma." As the women walked away, Red caught a snippet of their conversation. "This isn't over, Rachel," Sophia was saying. "Dylan says that girl is telling stories about him." "Perhaps we should discuss that separately," the principal replied, her voice fading as they turned the corner. Red filed away the information. There was more to Emma's story than just a fall. He returned to the classroom where Emma immediately looked up, relief washing over her face when she saw him. The rest of the morning progressed without incident. The children worked on their Friendship Day projects, interviewed their guests, and shared stories. Emma stayed close to Red, occasionally introducing him to classmates who gathered courage to approach. At recess, the snow had stopped, and the playground gleamed white under pale winter sun. Children bundled in coats and mittens raced outside, steam puffing from excited mouths. Red and the bikers stood along the edge of the field, watching Emma join a game of tag for the first time in months. Alvarez, the janitor, approached them, wiping his hands on a rag. "Never thought I'd see Hell's Angels at Everdale Elementary," he said, but there was no judgment in his voice, only a wry amusement. "Never thought we'd be here," Bear replied. Alvarez nodded toward Emma, now laughing as she chased another girl across the snow. "That kid needed someone. After the accident, she changed, stopped talking, stopped trying." He looked at Red. "You did a good thing." "About that accident," Red said quietly. "Emma mentioned you found her." The older man's face darkened. "Yeah, behind the equipment shed. Bad fall. But it wasn't just bad luck." He glanced around, making sure they weren't overheard. "Those kids tampered with the brake line on that old dirt bike, then dared her to ride it down the hill. I filed a report, but nothing came of it." Bear cursed under his breath. Stitch's hands clenched into fists. Red kept his voice even. "The chief's kid, Dylan, he was involved?" Alvarez nodded. "Leader of the pack, but his dad's the chief and his mom's on 3 school committees. You know how it goes." Red did know. Every town had its power structures, its unwritten rules about who mattered and who didn't. "Emma never told her mom the whole story," Alvarez continued. "Just said it was her fault, that she was showing off." He shook his head. "Kid's been protecting them, even after what they did." The conversation ended abruptly as Emma ran over, cheeks flushed from cold and exercise. "Red! They want us all for a big picture." Red smiled down at her, keeping his anger carefully hidden. "Lead the way, partner." The playground had become an impromptu photo shoot. Families grouped together, teachers directed traffic, And in the center of it all, 70 Hells Angels stood in formation with one small girl in front, her cast held proudly across her chest. As the school photographer called for everyone to say friendship, Red looked across the crowd and saw Sophia Parker watching from the building entrance. Beside her stood a boy about Emma's age, dark-haired and scowling. Dylan, the chief's son, the boy who'd helped rig a bike to fail and then laughed when it did. Red held the boy's gaze until Dylan looked away first. The lunch bell rang and children began streaming back toward the building. As agreed, most of the bikers prepared to depart, engines warming in the cold air. Red, Bear, and 5 others would stay for the afternoon ceremony. Emma waved goodbye to those leaving, her smile steady now, confident they'd kept their word and would again. As the children filed into the cafeteria, Emma found herself suddenly alone in the hallway. She'd stopped at her locker and the crowd had moved on without her. She was closing the metal door when a voice came from behind. "Well, look who thinks she's famous." Emma turned. Dylan stood there with 2 friends. They weren't laughing this time. They just looked uneasy, like they didn't know how to handle what they'd seen that morning. Emma's stomach tightened, but she stood still. "Bet you think you're special now, huh?" Dylan said, kicking at the hallway baseboard. "Bringing a gang to school, trying to scare people." "I didn't bring them," Emma said quietly. "They came." The tone of her voice wasn't angry, it wasn't even defensive. It was calm, and that calm unnerved Dylan more than yelling ever could. One of Dylan's friends muttered, "My dad said they're dangerous." "They're not," Emma replied. "They're my friends." That made Dylan laugh, short and sharp. "Friends? You don't even know them." Emma looked him in the eye. "I didn't know you either. But you still laughed when I fell." For a moment, Dylan had no answer. His face went red. "Whatever," he muttered and turned away. His friends followed, but slower than before. Something in the way Emma had said it, not angry, not small, made them rethink their steps. Mrs. Wilson, watching from the doorway of her classroom, saw the exchange. She didn't step in. She didn't need to. Some lessons don't need teachers. They just need witnesses. That afternoon, when lunch ended, the students gathered in the gymnasium for the final part of Friendship Day. A small stage had been set up, decorated with paper chains and a banner that read, "Friends Together." On a table beside it sat a stack of certificates and a Polaroid camera. Principal Winters stood at the microphone. "Welcome everyone to our Friendship Day celebration. Today, we recognize the importance of connection, of kindness, of being there for one another." The irony of her words wasn't lost on Red, who stood at the back of the gym with the remaining bikers. Principal Winter's smile was professional, but her eyes kept darting to the leather-clad men, a reminder of the morning's tension. "Each student and their special guest will come up to receive a friendship certificate and have their photo taken," she continued. "We'll go in alphabetical order by last name." The ceremony progressed smoothly. Names were called, photos were taken, polite applause followed each pair. Throughout it all, Red noticed Sophia Parker moving through the crowd, speaking quietly to other parents. Heads would turn in his direction, expressions changing from neutral to concerned. The whispered campaign was working. By the time they reached the W's, a small knot of parents had gathered near Principal Winters, their stance radiating displeasure. "Emma Walker and guest," Principal Winters called. Emma walked forward, Red beside her. The gym had grown quieter. The tension was palpable. Just as they reached the stage steps, a man in a police uniform entered through the gym's side door. Chief Parker. He moved purposefully toward his wife, leaning down to whisper something in her ear. She nodded, satisfaction spreading across her face. Red recognized the look. It was the face of someone who believed they'd won. Emma sensed it too. She hesitated on the first step, suddenly uncertain. Red placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Keep walking, Emma," he said softly. "Head high. We're here for you, not them." She nodded, straightening her spine, and continued up the steps. Principal Winters handed Emma her certificate with a tight smile. "Congratulations, Emma." The photographer motioned them together, camera raised. "Say friendship." Just as the flash went off, Chief Parker approached the stage. "Principal Winters, a word, please." The principal stepped aside, leaning down as the chief spoke in low, urgent tones. Her face changed from confusion to concern. "I see," she said finally, straightening. She turned to Red with an expression of forced regret. "Mr. Turner, I'm afraid there's been a development. Chief Parker has informed me that your presence here violates certain municipal codes. I'm going to have to ask you and your associates to leave. A murmur ran through the crowd. Emma's face fell. Red kept his voice calm, though anger burned beneath it. What codes would those be, ma'am? Chief Parker stepped forward. That's not relevant at the moment, Turner. What matters is that your group needs to exit school property immediately. Bear moved closer, a wall of quiet support behind Red. The remaining bikers shifted, not threatening, but present. Red looked down at Emma, her small face crumpling with disappointment. He'd promised her one day. Just one day where she wasn't alone. And now they were trying to take even that away. He knelt down to eye level with the girl. Emma, he said gently, sometimes people get scared of things they don't understand. That doesn't make them right, but it does mean we have to choose our battles. Tears welled in her eyes. They always win, she whispered. Red shook his head. No, they don't. Because we showed up. We kept our promise. That's a win that nobody can take from us. She nodded, still fighting tears. Red stood, facing the chief and principal. We'll leave, but I'd like to know which specific code we're violating for future reference. Chief Parker's jaw tightened. Gang activity within a school zone is prohibited. We're not classified as a gang by state law, Red replied evenly. We're a motorcycle club, registered, tax-paying, with regular charity events. Officer Reed cleared our visit this morning. Officer Reed overstepped, the chief said coldly. Principal Winters looked increasingly uncomfortable. Perhaps we could discuss this elsewhere. The children should see what happens when rules are broken, Sophia Parker cut in, stepping forward. It's an important lesson. Emma's voice rose suddenly, clear and firm. You broke the rules too. All eyes turned to her. What did you say, young lady? Sophia asked, her tone sharp. Emma stood straighter. You broke rules too. When your son broke my bike and told me to ride it anyway. A hush fell over the gymnasium. Dylan, standing near his mother, went pale. That's ridiculous, Sophia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Dylan had nothing to do with your accident. Mr. Alvarez saw, Emma continued, gaining strength. He filed a report. I have the copy in my desk. He gave it to me yesterday. Principal Winter's face changed as understanding dawned. The maintenance report. I found it last night when I was looking for Emma's medical forms. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Parents who had been watching with disapproval now looked confused. Teachers exchanged glances. Chief Parker placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Dylan, is this true? The boy stared at his shoes, saying nothing. But his silence was answer enough. Red watched it unfold with quiet satisfaction. Not because he wanted revenge, but because truth mattered. Because a little girl deserved justice, even if it came months later than it should have. Principal Winters cleared her throat. I think we need to address this separately. In the meantime, let's continue with our celebration. She turned to Red. Mr. Turner, you and your associates are welcome to stay for the remainder of the event. Sophia Parker's face flushed with anger. Rachel, you can't possibly— Enough, Sophia, Principal Winters said firmly. Your son has some explaining to do, and so do you about why a report of intentional harm to another student was buried. The gym remained silent as the implications sank in. Chief Parker, professional enough to recognize when a situation had changed, nodded stiffly to Red. We'll sort this out properly through official channels. Looking forward to it, Red replied. As the Parkers retreated with their son, the ceremony resumed. Names were called, photos were taken, but the mood had shifted irrevocably. Emma stood taller now, her certificate clutched in her good hand, her eyes clear and bright. She had spoken her truth, and for once adults had listened. When the final name was called and the last photo taken, Principal Winters made a closing announcement. Thank you all for joining us for Friendship Day. I think we've all learned something important today about courage, about speaking up, and about the many forms friendship can take. Her gaze lingered on Emma and Red, a silent acknowledgement that some lessons came from unexpected sources. As the crowd dispersed, Mr. Alvarez approached Emma. You did good, kid, he said, his weathered face proud. Real good. Emma smiled up at him. I just said what was true. That's the hardest part sometimes, the janitor replied. He nodded to Red. You got a good friend here, both of you. Outside, the winter afternoon was fading toward dusk, the sky turning the deep blue that precedes night. The remaining motorcycles gleamed under streetlights, just beginning to flicker on. Red stood with Emma on the school steps, watching parents and children stream toward cars and buses. You okay? He asked. Emma nodded. Yeah, it feels different. Different how? She considered, searching for the right words. Like I'm not carrying something heavy anymore. Red understood. Some burdens weren't meant for children to bear alone. Truth shared became truth lightened. Jessica arrived to pick Emma up, hurrying across the parking lot with apologies for being late. Her second job had run over. When Emma told her what happened, about the confrontation and the revelation, Jessica's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Shock, anger, pride, relief. She hugged her daughter close, then looked at Red with tear-filled eyes. Thank you, she said simply, for giving her this day. Red nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude he didn't feel he deserved. She did the hard part herself. As Emma and her mother walked toward their car, the girl turned back once. Will I see you again? She called. Red smiled. Count on it, partner. We've got a bike to fix, remember? That evening, the news had already spread through town. Hell's Angels at the elementary school, the police chief's son implicated in a covered-up accident. Versions varied depending on who told the story, but one thing remained consistent. A small girl with a broken arm had found her voice because 70 bikers had shown up when no one else would. At the diner where it had all started, Red sat in a booth by the window, watching snow begin to fall again outside. Bear slid in across from him, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. Quite a day, Bear said, pushing a mug toward Red. Red nodded. Yeah. Think it'll change anything? Red considered the question, watching the snow swirl under streetlights. For Emma, yeah. For the town, maybe. For us, he shrugged. We're still who we are. But they saw something different today, Bear said. Something true. Red smiled faintly. That's a start. They sat in companionable silence, sipping coffee, watching the world turn white outside. The day had been full of small victories and revelations. Not the kind that make headlines, but the kind that change lives one quiet moment at a time. Red's phone buzzed, a text from Jessica, with a photo attached. Emma asleep, the Hell's Angels patch clutched in her hand, a smile on her face even in dreams. The caption read, "She hasn't stopped talking about today. You gave her something no one can take away." Red stared at the image for a long moment. In his 30 years on the road, he'd seen places most people only dreamed of. He'd known freedom in its purest form, but somehow the sight of that sleeping child with his patch in her hand felt like the most important journey he had ever been part of. You know, he said finally to Bear, she asked for one day, just one day. And? Red put the phone away, his voice quiet but certain. I think we might have given her a lot more than that. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the town in a blanket of white, transforming everything it touched, making the familiar new again, just like one brave question had done for all of them. Morning came to Everdale with a pristine beauty that only fresh snow can bring. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a world transformed. Tree branches bowed under their white burden. Roads disappeared beneath untouched blankets of snow. The town itself seemed to hold its breath, peaceful in its winter slumber. But beneath that quiet surface, change was stirring. The events of yesterday had rippled through Everdale like stones thrown into still water. Hell's Angels at the elementary school, a long-buried truth finally exposed. A young girl who found her voice when 70 strangers decided to stand beside her. By sunrise, the story had already evolved through dozens of retellings, each version slightly different, colored by the teller's perspective. Yet the core remained the same. Something unexpected had happened in their small town, something that challenged what everyone thought they knew. At the Hells Angels clubhouse on the edge of town, Red stood by the window, coffee mug warming his hands. He watched the sunrise paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Behind him, several members slept on couches and chairs, having stayed up late discussing the day's events. Bear approached, his own coffee steaming in the cold air. You sleep at all? Red shook his head. Too much on my mind. The girl? Her, the school, that police chief. Red took a sip of his coffee. Something's not sitting right. Bear nodded. The janitor's report. If the chief buried evidence about his own kid, that's a problem bigger than just Emma. Red finished the thought. They stood in silence, watching the world brighten. The clubhouse phone rang, breaking the stillness. Joe answered, listened for a moment, then called over to Red. It's Principal Winters, he said. Wants to talk to you. Red took the phone, curious what could prompt a call this early. Mr. Turner, Principal Winters began, her voice tired but determined. I owe you an apology for yesterday, and I need your help. Red listened as she explained. After the revelation at the assembly, she'd stayed late at the school, digging through files. She found not just Alvarez's report on Emma's accident, but other incidents that had been similarly buried. All involved Dylan Parker or his friends. All had been quietly dismissed. There's a school board emergency meeting this morning, she continued. I'm presenting everything I found, but I'm concerned about Emma. She'll need to speak to tell her story. And after yesterday, she paused. I think she'd feel safer with you there. Red considered the request. Getting involved in small-town politics wasn't their style. They rode through places, they didn't change them. But this felt different. What time, he asked. 9 o'clock, at the district office. We'll be there, Red said, making the decision for all of them. When he hung up, Bear raised an eyebrow. School board meeting? Red nodded. Looks like yesterday was just the beginning. Across town, Emma woke to a different world too. For the first time in months, she didn't immediately feel the weight of dread pressing down on her chest. The memory of yesterday still felt dreamlike. 70 bikers lined up in the snow, the look on Dylan's face when she finally spoke the truth, the feeling of standing tall instead of making herself small. She got out of bed and crossed to her window. Outside, the world was transformed by snow, clean, new, full of possibility. On her nightstand sat the Hells Angels patch, her most prized possession now. Beside it lay the Polaroid photo from Friendship Day. Emma and Red on the small stage, both looking directly at the camera. No hesitation, no shame, just two people who had kept their word to each other. Her mother knocked softly on the door. Emma, you up? Jessica entered, already dressed for work, though dark circles under her eyes betrayed another night of too little sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed. Principal Winters called, she said. There's a meeting this morning about what happened with Dylan and the bike, about the report Mr. Alvarez filed. Emma felt a flutter of anxiety. Do I have to go? They'd like you to, honey, to tell what happened. Jessica took her daughter's hand, but only if you want to. Emma thought about it. The idea of speaking in front of adults, of facing the Parkers again, made her stomach twist. But then she remembered Red's words. Head high, we're here for you, not them. Will Red be there? She asked. Jessica smiled. Principal Winters already called him. He said yes. Emma nodded. Then I'll go too. The district administration building stood in the center of town, a brick structure with columns that spoke of authority and permanence. By 8:30, the parking lot was nearly full. Parents, teachers, and concerned citizens filed through the front doors, drawn by the whispered promise of controversy. Red and Bear arrived first, followed by Stitch and Tank. They parked their bikes in a neat row, ignoring the stares their arrival generated. Inside, they found the meeting room already crowded. They took positions along the back wall, a silent presence that couldn't be ignored. Emma and her mother arrived minutes later. When the girl saw the bikers, her face lit up with relief. She made her way through the crowd to Red's side. You came, she said. Told you we would, he replied. Chief Parker and Sophia sat near the front, Dylan between them. The boy kept his eyes down, shoulders hunched. His father looked straight ahead, jaw set. Sophia glanced back once, her expression hardening when she saw Emma with the bikers. At exactly 9, Principal Winters entered with the school board members. The room quieted as they took their seats at the long table facing the audience. Board President Eleanor Mitchell, a stern woman in her 60s, called the meeting to order. We've convened this emergency session to address serious allegations regarding student safety at Everdale Elementary. Principal Winters? Please proceed. Principal Winters stood, manila folder in hand. Thank you. Yesterday, during our Friendship Day event, information came to light about an incident that occurred last September. A student, Emma Walker, was seriously injured when a bicycle she was riding malfunctioned. At the time, it was reported as an accident. She opened the folder. However, evidence suggests the bicycle was intentionally tampered with by other students, who then challenged Emma to ride it. Our maintenance supervisor, Mr. Alvarez, filed a report documenting his findings. She placed several papers on the table. This report was never properly investigated. Moreover, I've discovered 5 other incident reports over the past year that were similarly dismissed or buried, and all involved the same group of students. A murmur ran through the crowd. Eyes turned toward the Parkers. This represents a serious breach of our safety protocols and ethical standards, Principal Winters continued. More concerning is the pattern suggesting preferential treatment based on family connections. Chief Parker stood abruptly. This is absurd. You're making accusations without evidence. I have the reports right here, Chief Parker, Principal Winters replied, her voice steady, including notes indicating your direct intervention in at least 2 cases. Those were minor incidents, kids being kids. A broken arm is not minor, Chief Parker, Principal Winters said. Neither is a concussion, which is what Melissa Ramirez suffered when she was pushed down the stairs in October. Another incident involving your son that was never properly addressed. The revelation sent another shockwave through the room. Parents turned to each other, whispering urgently. Board members leaned forward, examining the documents. Eleanor Mitchell adjusted her glasses. These are serious allegations, Chief Parker. Do you have a response? Before he could answer, Sophia Parker stood. This is a witch hunt. My husband has served this community for 20 years. My son is a good boy who sometimes makes mistakes, like all children. This vendetta against our family is unacceptable. This isn't about your family, Mrs. Parker, Principal Winters said. It's about all our children being safe and treated equally. Then why are those men here? Sophia demanded, pointing toward Red and the bikers. If this is about school safety, why invite known criminals to intimidate us? Red didn't react to the accusation, but Emma stepped forward, her voice clear in the suddenly quiet room. They're here because they believed me when no one else did. All eyes turned to the small figure with the cast on her arm. Board member James Hawkins, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, spoke gently. Would you like to tell us what happened, Emma? Emma looked up at Red. He nodded encouragingly. She took a deep breath and faced the board. Last September, I was trying to make friends with the girls at school. They said if I could ride Dylan's dirt bike down Bell Hill, they'd let me sit with much of them at lunch. Her voice was small but steady. When I got on the bike, Dylan said the brakes might be a little loose, but I'd be fine if I was careful. She touched her cast. The brakes didn't work at all. I crashed into the fence at the bottom of the hill. Dylan and the others just laughed. They didn't help me. Mr. Alvarez found me. Did you tell anyone what happened? Eleanor Mitchell asked. I told my mom I fell, Emma admitted. I didn't want to get in trouble for riding someone else's bike, and I didn't think anyone would believe me about Dylan and the others. Why not? Emma looked directly at Sophia Parker. Because they never did before. The simplicity of her answer hung in the air. No embellishment, no dramatic accusations, just the truth as she had lived it. Dylan suddenly stood, breaking away from his parents. It's true, he said, his voice cracking. I knew the brakes were broken. I thought it would be funny to watch her fall. He looked at Emma, his face flushed with shame. I didn't think she'd get hurt that bad. I'm sorry. The confession stunned the room into silence. Chief Parker reached for his son, but Dylan stepped away. Dad knew too, the boy continued. When Mr. Alvarez filed the report, Dad came to school. He took the report and said he'd handle it. Dylan's shoulders slumped. He told me not to worry about it, that it would go away. Chief Parker's face had gone pale. Dylan, that's enough. No, Dad, Dylan replied, suddenly looking older than his years. It's not enough. It's never been enough. The room erupted in voices, parents demanding answers, board members conferring urgently. Sophia Parker trying to pull her son back to his seat. Through it all, Emma stood still, her posture straight, her eyes clear. For the first time since the accident, She wasn't carrying the weight of a secret that was never hers to bear. Red watched with quiet pride. The girl had more courage than most adults he knew. Board President Mitchell gavelled the room to order. This meeting will recess for 30 minutes while the board discusses these revelations. Chief Parker, I suggest you remain available for questions. As the crowd began to disperse for the break, Red led Emma and her mother to a quiet corner of the hallway. You did good in there, he told Emma. Real good. It was scary, she admitted. Being brave usually is, Red replied. That's what makes it count. Jessica wiped tears from her eyes. I had no idea. All this time. Kids protect the strangest things, Bear said gently. Sometimes the wrong people, sometimes themselves. Principal Winters approached, her face showing the strain of the morning, but also relief. Thank you all for coming. Emma, you were very brave today. Emma nodded, suddenly shy again. What happens now? Red asked. The board will make recommendations, Principal Winters explained. But given what we've heard, I expect there will be consequences for Chief Parker professionally. As for Dylan and the other students, that's more complicated. They're children who need guidance, not just punishment. Red understood. Retribution wasn't the point. Accountability was, the chance to make things right moving forward. And the school? Jessica asked. Will things change there too? They already have, Principal Winters said, looking meaningfully at Emma. Thanks to your daughter and her friends. When the meeting reconvened, the board presented their preliminary findings. An independent investigation would be conducted into Chief Parker's actions. Disciplinary proceedings would be initiated. The school's safety reporting procedures would be completely overhauled to ensure transparency. For Emma, the specifics mattered less than the feeling that washed over her as truth finally prevailed. It wasn't triumph or vindication. It was simpler than that. It was the weight of silence finally lifted. Outside the building, snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting lazily from a pearl gray sky. The crowd dispersed quickly, hurrying to cars and warmth. The Parkers left as a unit. Dylan, glancing back, once said, Emma with an expression too complex to name. Red and the bikers stood by their motorcycles, preparing to leave. Emma approached with her mother. What now? Emma asked, reluctant for the day to end. Red smiled. Now we keep our other promise, about fixing that bike of yours. Really? Weather's not great for riding, Bear pointed out, gesturing to the falling snow. Perfect for repairs, though, Red replied. We've got time. And so, as the administrative wheels of justice began turning in Everdale, a different kind of restoration began at Emma's small apartment. The tiny bicycle that had hung from the porch railing was brought inside. Tools appeared. Expertise was shared. And a girl who had been invisible for too long found herself at the center of attention for all the right reasons. That afternoon, local news vans appeared in town. The story had spread beyond Everdale's borders. Hell's Angels standing up for a bullied child, a police chief's misconduct exposed, a small town confronting its own blind spots. It had all the elements that made people pause their busy lives and pay attention. Red declined all interview requests. We're not here for that, he told a persistent reporter. We're here for Emma, that's all. His refusal only added to the mystique. By evening, social media was buzzing with the story, each retelling more elaborate than the last. But at its heart, the truth remained simple. A child had asked for help, and 70 unlikely heroes had answered. 3 days later, with the media circus beginning to fade, Red sat on the steps of Emma's porch, watching her ride her newly repaired bicycle in slow circles on the snow-packed driveway. The red paint gleamed in the winter sun. New brakes, new pedals, new hope in the rider's eyes. Looking good, partner, Red called. You're a natural. Emma grinned, executing a careful turn. Mr. Alvarez is teaching me tricks at school. He says I have good balance. Jessica appeared in the doorway holding a tray with steaming mugs. Hot chocolate break, she announced. Emma parked her bike carefully and joined Red on the steps. Jessica handed them each a mug, then returned inside, understanding the bond between them needed its own space. School different now? Red asked. Emma nodded, blowing on her hot chocolate. The girls asked me to sit with them at lunch. Dylan stays away, but he's not mean anymore. Just quiet. And the cast comes off next week? She looked down at the plaster. now covered with so many signatures and drawings it was barely visible. Yeah, doctor says I'll need exercises to make my arms strong again. You'll do them, Red said confidently. You're tougher than you look. Emma smiled at that. Emos. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood children play in the snow. No words needed, just presence. Finally, Emma spoke. Red? Yeah? Why did you come that day? For real? Red considered the question. Not the easy answer, but the true one. Because a long time ago, I was a kid who needed someone to show up, he said finally. And no one did. Emma absorbed this, understanding more than her years might suggest. So you became the someone you needed. Red looked at her, startled by the insight. Guess I did. She leaned against his arm, a gesture of simple trust. I'm going to do that too. When I'm bigger. The promise settled between them like the most natural thing in the world, a circle completing itself. That evening, the local newspaper published its front-page story on the events at Everdale Elementary. The headline read, Hell's Angels Teach Small Town a Lesson in Friendship. Beneath it was a photo from Friendship Day. Emma in the center, surrounded by leather-clad bikers, all of them facing the camera with quiet dignity. The article didn't focus on leather or engines or stereotypes. It talked about a girl who stood alone until 70 strangers decided she shouldn't. It quoted Principal Winters. They taught us what showing up really means. By the next morning, the story had spread far beyond their town. Radio stations called. News crews wanted interviews. Red ignored most of them, but he couldn't stop the ripple that had already begun. At the clubhouse, the men gathered around the TV, watching clips from local news. The anchor spoke with a smile. One small act of friendship turned into a ride the whole country's talking about. Tank chuckled. We're famous for something good for once. Red leaned back in his chair. Don't get used to it. Bear looked at him. You think this will change anything? Red thought about that for a long time. Maybe not the world, he said, but maybe it'll change how one kid walks into school tomorrow. That's enough. Later that afternoon, Red's phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize. When he answered, a woman's voice said, Mr. Turner, this is Barbara Mills from Westridge Elementary in Fairfield. Red frowned. Fairfield was a town about 50 miles north. How can I help you, ma'am? He asked. I read about what you and your group did for that girl in Everdale, she said. And well, we have a situation here. A boy with autism who's being badly bullied. He loves motorcycles. His mother's at her wit's end. Ooh, Red listened, surprised by the request, but somehow not surprised at all. What are you asking exactly, Miss Mills? I'm asking if you and your men might consider a ride to Westridge. Just once, just to let this boy know he's not alone. Red didn't hesitate. When? Next Friday? It's his birthday. We'll be there, Red said. Send me the details. When the call ended, he sat there for a while, the phone still in his hand. He didn't feel proud. He felt human, like something old and hard in him had finally started to soften. Across town, Emma sat at her kitchen table, decorating the last corner of her cast with a marker. Across the top, she wrote 4 new words in big letters. Never ride alone again. Her mother smiled. That's a good one. Red said it once, Emma replied, not with words, but when he showed up. A knock came at the door. Emma jumped up and ran to answer. Outside stood Dylan, his father's squad car parked at the curb. The boy looked nervous, shuffling his feet in the snow. Hi, he said. Hi, Emma replied cautiously. Dylan swallowed hard. I wanted to say sorry, for real, not just because I had to. Emma studied him. Okay. And I wanted to give you this. He held out a small, wrapped package. I made it in art class. Emma took it carefully. Inside was a clay pendant shaped like a motorcycle. Crude but recognizable. I thought maybe you could hang it on your bike, Dylan said. Or whatever. You don't have to. Emma looked from the gift to the boy. Thanks. Dylan nodded, already backing away. See you at school. As he walked to his father's car, Emma called after him. Dylan? He turned. It gets better, she said. When you tell the truth, it feels better. He gave her a small smile. Yeah, I think you're right. From his parked truck down the street, Red watched through the windshield, unseen. He didn't step out. He didn't need to. Bear, sitting beside him, smiled. You think they'll make it stick? Red exhaled slowly. Yeah, he said, because it started with truth, and that never fades. The two men sat there watching as Emma closed her door and Dylan's father drove away. The world around them hadn't changed much. Bills still needed paying, roads still needed riding, but something small, something good had taken root. Maybe that's all change ever really needs. One brave kid, one honest apology, and a few people willing to listen when the engines go quiet. A week later, when Emma's cast came off, the doctor remarked on how well she'd healed. You've been doing your exercises, he observed. Emma nodded. I have people counting on me being strong. That evening, Red received a photo text from Jessica. Emma holding up her bare arm, flexing her muscles playfully, the Hells Angels patch proudly pinned to her jacket. The caption read, "Free at last. She says to tell you she's ready for her first real ride when the snow melts." Red smiled at the image. He forwarded it to the group chat, where it was met with a flurry of approving responses. These men, who had spent decades cultivating their fierce reputation, had found themselves unexpectedly invested in the recovery of a 10-year-old girl. Life moved forward in Everdale. The scandal involving Chief Parker resulted in his resignation. Sophia Parker withdrew from her school committees. Dylan returned to school after a brief suspension, changed in ways both subtle and profound. At Everdale Elementary, Principal Winters implemented new anti-bullying measures. Teachers received additional training. Mr. Alvarez was officially recognized for his years of quiet advocacy for students. And Emma? She bloomed like a flower that had finally found sunlight. She joined the bike club Mr. Alvarez started. She raised her hand in class. She made friends, real ones this time, based not on desperation, but on shared interests and mutual respect. Every Friday afternoon, at least one or two Hells Angels would stop by the school playground. Never in full gear, never making a scene. They'd help fix flat tires, offer riding tips, or sometimes just sit on the benches with kids who didn't have anyone waiting for them at home. The teachers stopped calling them those men and started calling them the Friday crew. Parents who had once viewed them with suspicion now waved in recognition. One cold February afternoon, Emma arrived at the playground early and found Red already there, working on a small mini bike the group had salvaged from a junkyard. He was trying to adjust the chain, muttering under his breath. Need help? Emma asked, smiling. Red looked up. You volunteering, partner? She nodded, pulling out a small toolkit from her backpack, one Bear had given her for Christmas. They worked side by side for an hour, the sound of metal clicking and the soft hum of distant traffic mixing into a comfortable silence. When they finished, Red turned the key. The small engine sputtered, then came to life. Emma's face lit up like sunrise. Red grinned. Looks like you've got yourself a training bike. I can't believe it works, Emma laughed. Red stood back, arms crossed. Told you, if something's worth fixing, you don't quit halfway. Later, the girl rode slow circles around the empty lot, her hair whipping in the cold wind, her laughter carrying across the air. It wasn't about speed or show. It was about freedom, the kind that comes when someone believes in you long enough for you to believe in yourself. From the bench, Bear said quietly, Kid rides like she was born to. Tank nodded. Looks like she's one of us now. Red smiled. She always was. By early spring, the snow had melted, revealing the first green shoots of a new season. The Friday rides expanded to include not just Emma, but other children who had gravitated to the unusual friendship. What had begun as one lonely child's desperate request had evolved into something no one could have predicted. Newspapers called it the Friends Ride Together movement. Other motorcycle clubs across the state picked it up, visiting schools, mentoring kids, creating safe spaces for the ones who didn't quite fit in. Nobody had planned it. It just grew, like good things often do when given room. On a bright April morning, Red stood with Emma outside her school. The cast was long gone, her arms strong again from diligent exercise. She held the handlebars of her red bicycle, freshly polished for the new season. You ready for the big ride this weekend? Red asked. Emma nodded excitedly. The Hells Angels had organized a charity ride for childhood safety. Emma would be joining them for the first mile, her bicycle decorated with streamers and signs. "Mom's nervous," she confided, "but I told her it's safer with you guys than anywhere." Red chuckled. "Smart kid." Emma looked up at him, her face serious suddenly. "Red? Yeah? What you did coming that day? It changed everything." Red shook his head. "You changed it, Emma. We just showed up." "But that's the part that matters most," she said with the simple wisdom of childhood. "Showing up is everything." Red couldn't argue with that. In his decades on the road, he'd learned that life's most important moments often came down to that one choice. Not grand gestures or dramatic promises, just the quiet decision to be present when it mattered. As he rode away from the school that morning, the spring air still carrying winter's last chill, Red thought about the strange journey the past few months had been. How one small voice in a snowy parking lot had led them all here, to a place none of them could have imagined. Behind him, the town of Everdale went about its day, streets once wary of their presence now familiar with the sound of their engines. People who once crossed to avoid them now nodded in recognition. And in a classroom by the playground, a girl who once had no one to stand beside her now had to choose which friend to invite for the next school event. That night, Red parked his bike outside the diner where it had all begun. The neon lights flickered softly in the dusk. Inside, the coffee tasted the same as it always had, but the quiet inside him was different now. He watched the road through the window, long and endless, winding through the hills beyond town. And he thought about those 7 simple words that had started everything. "Can you be my friend for one day?" He whispered them again, not out of sadness, but gratitude. Because that question had given him something he hadn't realized he was missing. Purpose. And in a world that often moved too fast, maybe that was the rarest gift of all. To be asked for kindness and to discover that answering it could change your own life too. Months later, as summer painted Everdale in vibrant greens and golds, a visitor arrived at the Hells Angels clubhouse, a reporter from a national magazine interested in the Friends Ride Together program that had spread to 30 states. Red agreed to a brief interview on one condition: Emma would be included too. They sat on the clubhouse steps, an unlikely pair, the weathered biker with graying beard and the small girl with quick smile and bright eyes. "What made you stop that day?" the reporter asked Red. "When she asked you to be her friend?" Red looked at Emma, who was polishing her motorcycle pendant, now hanging from a leather cord around her neck. "Because she asked," he said simply. "Most people don't." "And you, Emma? Were you scared to approach them?" Emma considered the question. "A little, but my grandma always says brave just means scared, but doing it anyway." The reporter smiled. Wise grandma. "The wisest," Emma agreed. Later, after the interview ended and the reporter departed, Red and Emma sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "He's going to make us famous," Emma said. Red chuckled. "Maybe, but that's not why we do it." "Why do we do it?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Red thought about it. Because showing up matters. Because keeping your word matters. Because sometimes all it takes to change a life is one person who sees you when you feel invisible. Emma nodded, understanding. "Like you did for me." "And like you did for us," Red replied. "Don't forget that part. You changed us too, Emma." She smiled at that, pleased with the idea that giving and receiving flowed both ways. As night fell over Everdale, lights began to appear in windows. Families gathered for dinner. Children were called in from play. The ordinary rhythm of small-town life continued, unchanged in many ways, yet profoundly different in others. For in one corner of that ordinary town, an extraordinary friendship had taken root and flourished. A friendship that began with a simple question in the snow and grew into something neither party could have imagined. Red started his bike, the familiar rumble filling the quiet street. "Home time, partner." Emma climbed onto her bicycle, ready to ride alongside him as far as her street. "Race you to the corner," she challenged. "You're on," Red laughed. They took off together down the empty road, one small and swift, one large and powerful, but somehow perfectly matched. Their contrasting silhouettes merged in the fading light, becoming one shadow stretched long against the pavement. Behind them, the clubhouse lights shone steady in the gathering darkness. Inside, men who had once defined themselves by their separateness from society now found themselves woven into its fabric in unexpected ways. And in a world that often forgot the power of simple human connection, a small town in the heart of America had been reminded that heroes don't always look like we expect them to. Sometimes they wear leather instead of capes. Sometimes they ride motorcycles instead of white horses. And sometimes the bravest hero of all is a child who still believes that if you ask for help, someone might actually listen. As Emma and Red disappeared around the corner, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze, a star appeared in the deepening blue above. The first of the evening, a silent witness to the journey they had taken together. A journey that began with 8 small words trembling in the cold morning air. Can you be my friend for just one day? And ended with a truth as old as time itself. That friendship, true friendship, never rides alone.